Good to be with you all. Good Shepherd Sunday. It's not a technical feast day in the church, but it's always the fourth Sunday after Easter from who knows how long, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The story of the Good Shepherd in Psalm 23 gets read in church. So it's the same story. We go through a 3-year cycle of readings, but generally on this Sunday, we get the same gospel every year. And I didn't think I had only one sermon that I preached on this Sunday, but someone at 8 o'clock was like, I love your Good Shepherd Sunday sermon. I think this is the fourth time I've heard it. And I thought, okay, I'm entering that stage in my ministry where I guess I like to think I still release new music, but I guess I have some greatest hits that I like to play too, right? So apparently this might be the first time you've heard a Good Shepherd sermon from me, but apparently I have one. I was told this morning I have one, but it's a good one, they said, but I have one. But it's the story of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And Jesus tells the disciples and everyone who's listening, I am the Good Shepherd. Not I am a Good Shepherd, I am the Good Shepherd. And there is something he's trying to communicate to them about his character, about why he's doing what he's doing, about his motivation through that sentence that maybe we lose a little bit because we're not shepherds. We don't have sheep. But they would pick up on. So there's 3 things I want to say that he's communicating through that story of the good, saying that sentence, I am the Good Shepherd, that they would have heard, when they would have had an idea of what a good shepherd is, that maybe we miss. And it's the Good Shepherd leads, the Good Shepherd protects, and the Good Shepherd rescues. And then we'll talk about why this picture here was found in the tombs, in the catacombs, from the earliest centuries of the church. So the Good Shepherd leads, and a good shepherd leads a certain way. Shepherds, there was just like any job, right? Shepherds, there were good ones, there were bad ones, and there were ones that did the job well, and admirably, there were ones that did the job poorly. And a good shepherd would be able to lead the sheep just by sound. A lot of times they would have like a flute. I don't know if you ever see like pictures of shepherds, or maybe in like a Christmas scene, there's a shepherd and he's got a flute, like an instrument. A good shepherd from Jesus' day would lead by a tune. And so they would play on a flute or some sort of instrument, a tune that the sheep would hear. And because the shepherd and the sheep were together so much, the sheep would know the tune. Right, you understand this. You know, if there's a song that comes on that you heard 100 times or 1,000 times, you know it. You can just pick it up within the first minute, or not even, first few seconds. You know the tune. Some of you that have young kids or have had young children, there might be a show that your kids watched 1,000 times, and you would know the theme song of that cartoon in your head, even if you try to forget it. You can't, right? It's in there. Mammals are like that, right? They know the tune. So sheep, even though sheep are not smart, but sheep would know a tune. And so the shepherd would play that specific tune over and over again when they were with the sheep. So when it came time to lead the sheep somewhere, the shepherd would just walk in front of the sheep, play the tune, and the sheep would follow. As long as they could hear the shepherd playing the tune, they would just keep going in that direction. A good shepherd leads that way. A bad shepherd would lead from behind, would try to drive, would hit, would try to push. But a good shepherd spent time with the sheep, and the sheep knew the tune. And Jesus is trying to say something to us, that he is the type of shepherd that leads from the front. He is the good shepherd. He will lead from the front. He will play the tune, so to speak. If we spend the time with him, we'll be able to hear it and know it. That's one of the questions I get from people a lot, is how do I know when God's leading in my life? And there isn't like necessarily a thing you can do in the moment. It kind of creates like this awareness. Sometimes through prayer, we can develop a peace with the directions God is leading us. But the best way is to just spend consistent time with him, and you'll get to learn the tune, so to speak. Like the sheep and shepherd would spend time together, and they would know the tune. And so when the sheep would hear the tune, they would go. So the good shepherd leads. The second thing, the good shepherd protects. And this is something that shepherds had to do. Jesus talks about this in his gospel. He says the hirelings don't do this because the hirelings care about themselves. The shepherds care about the sheep because it's their sheep. Right? It's the difference like between someone who rents a home and someone who owns a home. Right? Renters don't really care about the house because it's not their house. They care about themselves. Homeowners care about the home because it's theirs. They're invested in it. It means something to them. Same way, shepherds care about the sheep because they're invested in it. A shepherd, their flock is their livelihood. So they're invested. So when danger comes to the sheep, the shepherd defends. And so the shepherd would have a staff. On one end would be a blunt point, and the shepherd would use that to defend if there was a predator coming towards the sheep that was coming too close. They would use it to drive the sheep away. Sometimes they would carry a metal rod, like we would think like a billy club or a nightstick, something like that they would have that too if they had to get close to something to try to knock it out. But the shepherd would try to use that staff to defend because the shepherd cared about the sheep, wanted to protect the sheep from the dangers that came from the outside. And Jesus talks about the wolf coming, and you can kind of get an idea of who Jesus is alluding to. Right? When the wolf comes to attack his flock, the shepherd defends. The shepherd defends. But that's not the only way the shepherd protects. The shepherd also protects the sheep from themselves. Because it's not just dangers from the outside. Sometimes sheep are their own worst enemy. Sheep aren't super smart, and they don't have a real good attention span. So the way a sheep doesn't just say, I'm going to rebel against my shepherd and run away. Just like most of us don't just say, I'm going to rebel against God. Right? Most of us don't do that. Similar process in our lives and in the life of sheep. A sheep would just kind of see something and take a step, and see something else and take a step, and kind of get distracted and take a step, and take another step, and take another step. And then maybe after 10 or 15 minutes, the sheep would realize, like, where am I? I'm lost. I've wandered. I've separated from the flock. I'm away from the shepherd. And we'll talk about what happens then in a minute. But sheep wander, just inch by inch, step by step, distraction by distraction. And sometimes those things are just as dangerous to the sheep as full-on rebellion or a predator from the outside, because it still does the same thing. It separates the sheep from where it's safe. And so the shepherd on the other end of the staff would have a hook that would look like that, and it would use it to grab the sheep around the neck when it saw it start to wander and pull it back in. Because animals, if you notice about animals go where they're looking, right? So if you want to redirect an animal, you have to redirect where it's looking. And so the shepherd would use the hook to pull its head around back to the flock so it would see the flock and come back in. Sheep are not necessarily smart enough to realize they're wandering off while they're wandering. And so the shepherd would protect the sheep from themselves. Sometimes in our lives that looks like God's correction. It can be subtle. It could be painful. It might feel a little jarring. If my mother were here, she would tell you a story about how the time she was so happy when I got beat up in middle school. Now, most mothers don't get excited when their children get beat up. I would say this, but you don't know my mother. She's a little bit different. She's a little bit different that way. And it wasn't a great time in my life. Middle school kids are, not our middle schoolers, but other middle schoolers like me, were just not a great time of life, and I wasn't really a respectful young man at that time. And, single family, single parent stuff, just dealing with a lot of anger in my own way, not healthy, not productive. And started hanging out with a group that was not a good influence on anybody, really. And my mom made it known that it was not good for me to be with this group. And, the last person like a 14-year-old boy wants to listen to is their mom, right? You should listen to your mom because they're right, but it's the last person we want to listen to. And continued going down that path. And one day something kind of blew up and happened, and there was this big fight. And I did not come out in good shape from this fight. I can tell you that right now. Not that you should handle problems that way, but you know how boys can be sometimes. And I remember coming home, and I was wearing the effects of not winning that fight quite visibly. And my mother said, "Oh, what happened?" And at first she was concerned. And I explained what happened and how this meant I'm done with that group. I'm never going around those people again. And her concern turned to joy. And I thought it was a little weird, right, that she would be happy that her son got beat up. But she was, again, because you don't know my mother. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I've been praying for God to correct your path. This is an answer to my prayer." I said, "Could you be a little more specific when you pray next time? This doesn't involve me getting punched in the eye. That would be helpful." But sometimes God's correction is not pleasant, depending on how far we're wandering. Now, in hindsight, of course, she was right. Those kids some of them are in jail. Some of them ended up a mess. Right? She was right. But I wasn't listening, and I feel like that was one of those moments in life, and there's been several others, where God kind of yanked the hook around my neck and pulled me back on a path that I should be on. I hope your corrections are more gentle and more subtle. But he does that because he loves us, because he's trying to keep us safe. So sometimes the shepherd's protection is from enemies on the outside, and sometimes it's from ourselves and our own rebellion and wandering and distraction. So the good shepherd protects. And then the last part is the good shepherd rescues. And this is what happens when the sheep wanders too far and the shepherd doesn't catch it in time to correct it. Sheep aren't smart, and sheep don't have good defense mechanisms. So if a sheep wanders from the pack and they realize after time, after they've been distracted, and they separate, they get out of earshot of the shepherd leads the sheep, because remember, the shepherd's in front. So he's not in the back watching if the 100th sheep is coming. He's trusting that the 100th sheep is in tow. A sheep it will take time for them to realize they're separated. And when they do, they panic. And panic is not a great response, but you and I have had it in certain times of fear. They panic, and when a sheep panics, their legs stop working. And they just kind of turn into jelly, and they fall. And they start crying. And so what happens is they can't get back. They're just sitting there crying. They're wide open for attack because they're calling attention to themselves. And if the shepherd isn't listening for and searching for the sheep that's lost, most likely it's going to get attacked. So the good shepherd rescues. This is what this picture is trying to show, and this is what this image on our bulletin is trying to show. And Jesus talks about this, about leaving the 99 to go find the one. The only way the sheep gets back is if the shepherd goes and gets it and carries it home. So the shepherd would go search for the sheep. He would listen for the cry, and if he found the sheep before a predator did, he would grab the sheep and put it around his neck, because its legs wouldn't work. It would take about 30 minutes or so for the legs to come back and them to have that function again. But even so, you don't see too many people with sheep on a leash in your neighborhood. They're not like the pet that just follows with you, right? So the shepherd would place the sheep on his neck and carry it home. The good shepherd rescues. This image is something that was found on the tombs in the catacombs. That's where we have it from. That's why it was preserved. And it was the common image. There's three really, really old images of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, all without a beard, that are still preserved because they were in the catacombs. And I think it's a beautiful thought that early Christians would look at Jesus and think about dying as kind of the sheep's last cry for help. That point where there's nothing we can do to rescue ourselves. And we would just call for him, and he would come and get his lamb and take it home. And what an image of hope and comfort. You can see why they put it on their tombs, because they believe that that's what happened. Not just in death, But in times of struggle, he's listening, wanting to rescue. If we cry for him, he will. He's the good shepherd. It's what he does. It's what he does. Now, it's amazing that he's always listening for those moments when we can't help ourselves. And you may find yourselves in those moments on occasion where you're just stuck, and maybe you've made the mess yourself, or maybe other people have dragged you into this mess, or maybe it's nothing anyone did, but you're just in a place where you don't know what to do, and you don't know where to go, and you're stuck. And if we call for him, he's searching to come get us. So the Good Shepherd leads from the front. If we hear the sound of his voice, if we spend time with him, the Good Shepherd protects not only us from the dangers on the outside, but from those our own worst impulses if we're close to him. And the Good Shepherd rescues if we cry for him. Thank the Lord for Jesus, our Good Shepherd. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.